Hey everybody, hope all's well. Today's a discussion on how best to judge the return on investment from our different marketing endeavors, which is a relatively complex thing to do. And it I don't normally do it in a webinar format because it's such a unique um, endeavor. Every business is a little bit different, and every business tracks EBITDA and ROI and net profit differently, and so it can be hard to do as a webinar just because I'm trying to be presenting everything to everybody essentially. But as Julie mentioned, there's this really cool little questions and comments bar in the Go to Web webinar console. So if you have any questions or comments, or you need it to be related to you in any way, shape, or form, feel free to throw all of that stuff our way, and I'll do my best to kind of dial it in and whatnot. So I guess I was at a client meeting down in DC maybe a month or two ago, and I was throwing around words like net profit and web to lead conversion rate and ROI and EBITDA, and the head of the organization, which was a nonprofit, got really upset with me, really truly very upset with me. And he banged on the table and he's like, cut all those acronyms, get all that stuff. I don't know what any of that stuff means, which is ironic because he's probably running a $20-30 million organization and he didn't know what ROI meant. But that's probably a conversation for a different story. So I just thought it might be nice for us initially kind of define what a few of these terms were that I'm going to be using in today's conversation, just so we're all on the same page. When we think about top line revenue or gross revenue, we think about the revenue that we get as a company, all the revenue we receive. We subtract any expenses, all of our payroll, any mortgage payments, anything like that, and we more or less end up with net profit. There are a few other terms like EBITDA if you're on the buying side or selling side. Oftentimes in this industry, people sell their companies as a percentage or a multiplier of EBITDA, which is essentially net profit with a few things taken out and put back in. Generally in this industry, the reason why EBITDA or net profit is used as a tool for evaluation is essentially it's telling your buyer, or if you're the buyer, it's allowing you to essentially evaluate how much you can take out. All right. So if you're buying a business that is cash flowing $200,000-300,000, and you're looking to pay more than, let's just say, $1 million, $1.5 million for that business, it's going to be very hard for the existing business to actually pay you to buy it. All right. So you're going to have to increase revenues and drop more money to the bottom line in order to actually afford to purchase the business. That's not really necessarily what we're going to be getting into today, though. We're going to be talking about is how you can measure the ROI on your marketing endeavors. But I wanted to kind of start with this more macro level viewpoint, because I currently have another business in the outdoor space who is likely having the same problem that all of you are having, which is that the costs to market are ever increasing, one. Two, the ways in which we can market are becoming fuzzier and fuzzier through multi-touch attribution. Back in the day for this other business, I used to be able to post a listing in the New York Times, and we would get lots of business as a result. Now, with the internet, everything's a little bit more interconnected. And lastly, closed loop reporting is increasingly difficult for our industry. These are really important because if you're a marketing director or you're a business owner, or you're like me, you probably are doing your 220 budget in the end of Q3. And you're sitting down, you're saying, for 220, I'm going to spend this much on marketing. But that budget might include a few different buckets. That might be your, web maintenance money might be in marketing. You might be doing some print within marketing. You might be spending on online digital advertising. That might be under marketing. And then you might be hiring an agency like us to help with the marketing. So from my perspective, it's super important to figure out what is exactly contributing to revenue and at what rate. I'm not sure if you can see, I'm north of Chicago right now at a very, very, very large healthcare company that's actually in the beauty products line. and I was just in the boardroom for like the first 3 hours of the day. And the only thing they want to talk about is ACOS, which is like a fancy word for saying ROI in like the healthcare realm. These guys, I love them. They're great, but they don't want to hear any of the numbers. They don't want to hear anything else other than how much did you spend and how much did I earn? And they use one source of truth, which for them is ACOS. And that essentially allows us to use the same measurement, whether we're spending $500,000 on social or $50,000 a month on Amazon. We're using one source of truth, and we'll get into that a little bit too. So let's just talk about why this is increasingly important. For companies in the travel space, there are lots of different ways to attract business. There are companies that purely rely on B2B referral of business. Signature and Virtuoso and travel agencies. There are tour operators who entirely subsist on B2B. For me, I think it's a little risky because you're putting all your eggs in one basket. But there are operators out there who may not even have a website. If they have a website, it might as well just be a placeholder, right? And their relationships, their B2B relationships, are what fills their business. In their scenario, they probably don't do a lot of marketing, or marketing for them is going to visit someone at a trade show or make those sort of connections. So that's about as far B2B as you can get. Then you have companies that have a foot in both camps. They'll reach out to consumers and they'll reach out to businesses. Remember, B2B companies tend to spend very, very little on marketing. It's when you have to go directly to consumer, and that's when you're burning a hole in your Amex card, spending on Facebook or Google AdWords. The most successful tour operators, travel companies that I know have a foot in both camps. They have a good piece of their business that comes from a B2B perspective, that comes from the business connections and large brokers, as well as going after consumers. And then, of course, we have customers that are businesses that are entirely marketing at consumers. It's very, very expensive. It's freeing in some way because you don't have to report to any other organization or travel agent or business partner, but there are a lot of perils and pitfalls. And within that B2C positioning, there are also a few different emulations of how you can run that business model and how you want to report on it. For example, I was on the phone yesterday with a company that does a lot of multi-day tours to South America, but a $10 million business. They're not on social. They're not using email marketing automation. They're not doing SEO. They have a good but basic website, and all of their marketing dollars are put into Google AdWords, PPC, probably about $450,000 to $500,000 worth. And that business owner laser focused on what the returns are of each one of those investments. It probably wouldn't be what I would do. I'd probably diversify because he's hitting an issue that we're all now hitting, which is Google AdWords has been increasing in cost year to year. 5-10 years ago, if I was advertising over the New York market for a multi-day tour, I would be able to buy the richest demographic who would come for a multi-day trip at about roughly $1 a click. Today, it might be as high as $7 or $8 for that same user. And while I still think it's important to advertise on Google AdWords, while I still do and my customers still do, it's important to also look out into the future as to what we'll be spending on advertising in 10 years, on Google AdWords in 10 years, and make sure that we start making investments today, that we start building life rafts using other advertising mechanisms, so we don't have to be so dedicated to one. And if that one particular avenue of marketing becomes too expensive, or our return on that investment reduces, that we have other options to jump to. It's a real issue. Additionally, and you're probably seeing this in the OTA market right now, Google has gone into flights, which I'm sure you guys all know. They have Google Flights now, but they're now getting into Google Hotels. These sort of disruptions have far-reaching consequences. And in our neck of the woods, We just want to make sure that we have multiple different ways that we acquire clients, that we know how much it costs us to acquire each client, and that we're able to confidently spend when it comes to marketing. So we don't have to feel like we're just throwing money out the window and we're crossing our fingers. There are a couple of KPIs that I've talked about in a few of the other workshops that we've done here. We always think about like 4 KPIs when running your business. And the truth is they all relate to the ROI on what we spend. The first KPI that is really important if you're looking to maintain, let alone scale your business, is to figure out what it costs you to bring one new user to the website who is a qualified user. If you're trying to buy a qualified user using Google AdWords, it might cost you a couple bucks. But there are other ways of doing it as well. You can buy on Facebook, you can buy on Instagram. The company I'm at right now, they buy on Amazon. There's lots of different ways, but the first KPI is to figure out how much it costs to bring one new user to the website. The second KPI that we want to be very, very, very cognizant of is the percent or the conversion rate it takes for people who hit your website to become leads. The third is the rate at which you convert leads to customers. And the fourth is the lifetime value of the customer. And one of the questions like we get constantly asked is, how much should I spend on marketing next year? Constantly asked this question. And like, I understand it. Like, we all want to know, hey, how much do I have to put into my 220 budget for marketing next year? What I do personally when I try to speak with clients, or what I would advise if you're doing this for your own company or working as a marketing manager, is to always reverse that. So instead of saying, hey, we spent 50 grand last year on marketing, maybe this year we'll spend 60 grand, working backwards. What are the goals? What are the top line revenue goals that you want to hit next year? How many customers will that require? How many new customers that you have to get? Let's put aside returning customers perhaps, or any like partnerships. And then figuring out what the cost is to acquire a new customer based on the budget that we have. Working backwards allows us to really figure out some of these harder metrics. And I'll show you an example right now. If anyone has any questions that wants to jump in right now, perfectly apt to. If not, I'm just going to show you exactly how we can make that happen. So what I'm showing you right now is data from one of my businesses up in New England. I guess I can probably jump back a little bit and I can show you a slightly different format. Awesome. Yeah, this is great. So, actually, I'm going to show you a slightly different one. So when we think about those 4 KPIs, and I'm literally living this right now because I'm in a situation where I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars that I don't want to necessarily spend, and I'm trying to figure out how I get the best bang for my buck with all of these different marketing opportunities. So essentially, from an AdWords perspective, and I can look at this pretty quickly. From an AdWords perspective, since January, I'm spending about $2.27 or $2.72 per click. CPC refers to cost per click. That more or less tells you how much you spend to bring one new user to the site. And what you guys can see here is I spent $232,000 at a cost per click of $2.72. And I've been able to, as a result of that, produce about 2,700 leads, right? At about a 3% conversion rate. Does that make sense? So if we divide the amount I've spent by the number of leads I've gotten, not only do we have our first KPI of what it costs us to drive one new user, not only do we have the rate at which our website converts new users to leads, but we also have the cost per lead, which is about $100, maybe $80, $90, depending on the month per lead. Let's just call it $100 a lead. So right now, I know it costs me about $3 to acquire a new user. I know 3% of new users will become an inquiry, will become a lead. I know that when I take a look at how many leads I got and how much money I spent, I know I'm buying new inquiries at about $100 a piece. And if I look back over at my my web to lead forms where I track all of my sales data, I know that I'm about 4 or 5 leads per sale. So what does that mean? that means I'm essentially buying a new customer for about $500. Now, we all have different margins and different net profit ratios and whatnot. For me in this business, the lifetime value of having one new client is about, I don't know, maybe 18 to 20,000, give or take. So what this data basically shows, and the reason why I'm spending so much on marketing, is that I realize that I can essentially buy a customer for about $500, and that the lifetime value of that customer might be 20,000. In this particular industry, I'm referring to like a summer camp industry right now. This is my little summer camp over here. This industry is like super antiquated, super antiquated. Many people in the industry think that marketing means going to like a little bit of like a pop-up trade show in a gymnasium, or putting an ad in the back of the New York Times. And because the industry is a little behind the times, it's allowed me specifically to grow the business exponentially. Within rafting, within adventure travel, the cost ratio tends to be a little different. If we're talking about like a multi-day luxury trip, then maybe the same sort of like metrics would apply. If we're talking about a $30 or $40 rafting trip in Northern California, it's clearly going to be a lot different. But the concept is the same. If you're already thinking about 219, or you're trying to make some last minute changes on, on 219, this is where you'd want to start. And so how about we look for a few huge red flags here right off the bat. So I'm spending about $250,000. My cost per click is about $2. One of the key things to look at here is bounce rate. Like if you guys are opening up your Google AdWords accounts and you're seeing a bounce rate that's in like the 90 percentile, it essentially means about like 9 out of every $10 that we're spending, isn't going where we want it to. So you really want to dig in there to figure out exactly what's going on. It could be that you're buying the wrong traffic. It could be that the website is not properly set up to convert. But arguably the most important thing that you'd want to look at is goal rate conversion, goals completed, and goal value. You'll see under Camp Cody here, you'll see that there's no goal value. And we run into this like issue all the time, like the same thing with ORs, right? So, obviously I'm not going to share like any ORs data necessarily. Well, I'm just not. But I think anyone can realize that you could, for example, book this Alaska rafting trip for $6,500 via their website. But anyone in this industry knows that no one is just going to book a $6,500 trip after booking and clicking on an ad. The same thing is true with Camp Cody. Our families don't just book after seeing one ad, nor do they necessarily book immediately online. It's the reason why my goal value is 0. Now with ORs, we have connected their goal value. So we actually do have transparency over how people book towards the end of their life cycle. But if you're in the multi-day market, I don't need to tell you that most people end up calling over the phone, and thus it skews the data a little bit. If we look at other more day trip oriented businesses, you can see situations where you're able to pass that revenue dollars. So here we have a client that's up 20% on users and up 62% on revenue, from 113,000 to 185,000. And you can see source by source what's working and what's not working across the board, right? So like hugely helpful. If you have a day tripping business and you're using software like the Flybook or Checkfront or any of the like awesome booking softwares that are out there, just remember that this goal value should be synced with your analytics. If it's not, it's super dangerous to be running campaigns, because essentially you're spending money and you don't necessarily know in real time what you're getting. With Camp Cody, with ORs, we're in situations where the buying cycle can be weeks and months. So we don't get that sort of immediate gratification. But if you're running a day trip, if your product's under $200-300 a person, then that goal value is hugely helpful, because you can just log in here at the end of the month, you call up your marketing person or call in your agency and say, all right, guys, it looks like we we made $5,000 this month and we spent $5,000. Clearly an issue. Just remember, just make sure that all of your goal values and goal completion information is working. I mentioned also, just when I was referencing ORs there, the idea of like multi-touch attribution. I for a long time, I thought this was less of an issue when it came to like day trips or half-day trips, and obviously more of an issue when it came to like longer multi-day trips. But in looking at the data, I'm afraid it's probably relevant for both. I'll show you a quick example of what I mean there. So this form right here, if you guys go under in your analytics, go under conversions, again, you have to have them set up, which let me just be clear here. If you don't have conversions set up and you haven't synced your booking software with analytics, not to be like, not to be a little like dramatic, but like if you're spending money on marketing and you don't have your conversion set up and you haven't closed the loop in terms of your booking data, then you have no clue what is working and what isn't working. But if you do connect everything, you get these nice little graphs. And this tells like a pretty interesting story that we can get into a little bit. When you guys go to, like when we were looking at Google Analytics earlier, and we were looking at like Camp Cody specifically, what we saw is that we had a variety of different sources of traffic. Google AdWords, Google Organic, Direct, Facebook, HubSpot. We have all these different sources of traffic here, and they all convert and perform at a different rate, right? And they all yield different amounts of conversions, right? And it's pretty interesting. When you're looking at this sort of view and you're trying to figure out what the ROI is on each of these different sources, so if you're looking at like your Facebook traffic or your Instagram traffic and you're trying to figure out what did I get for this investment? Here I am, the team's been working since January on Instagram. We got 453 people and we got 33 inquiries. When you're sitting here and you're thinking about this, remember that these traditional viewpoints that show you data are tracking based on last touch attribution. And here's what I mean by that. Imagine you are advertising on Google and you're advertising, a Snake River tour, and someone Googles, best Snake River outfitter, and they click on the ad, and they come to your website, they browse around a little bit, and then they leave. But you have a Facebook or a remarketing pixel installed, so our ads are following them around the internet, and then like a week later they go, oh yeah, I was going to book that trip, and they come back, but then they decide not to. So they leave and they putter around and they go, oh, you know what, I remember the name of that outfitter, I better go Google it or type it into the URL. And then they book at that last phase. Google, using this report, would attribute that data to organic or direct. It wouldn't give any credit to the paid Facebook campaign that like kept you top of mind, and it wouldn't give any credit to the paid search campaign that initially brought that user to your business. And so it's just key to remember when you're seeing these sort of goal completions, this is last touch. And if you're in a business that has extended consideration paths, you end up seeing something like this. So each one of these conversions represents a lead, represents someone becoming a lead for the business. So you can see, for example, paid search, paid search, paid search is a pretty common initiator of bringing users to the business, but very rarely does someone end up converting, becoming a lead, or booking as a result of paid search. I'll give you an example. This user came through one of our ads, came back through one of our organic searches, but then ultimately came back through a paid ad and became a lead. In fact, we had 2 people who did this. Whereas this person came through a paid ad, came back through organic, and then ultimately became a lead through a direct source. So Google AdWords wouldn't receive credit for this. Long story short, the way I attribute value here for paid digital marketing efforts is to, in general, look at first touch attribution. And so there's like an adventure company in the Northeast that spends, a couple $100,000 on advertising each year, and they have a couple different like centers. And we've been like wrestling, and I have a meeting with them tomorrow, and we've been wrestling on how to really monetize the value of paid search. So imagine all of these are customers, and I could, in fact, rather easily make this actual bookings. So I'm only tracking people who actually became clients. So instead of just tracking leads, I am literally only tracking people who ended up booking. So here we have situations where, let me go down and I'll open it up a little bit. So we have situations where all of these users ended up becoming clients as a result of paid search. But paid search, when we look at it holistically, won't actually receive the credit for what is likely, $50,000, $80,000 worth of revenue, maybe more, because it wasn't the last function. And so it's super helpful to come up with a formula, to think of this as like a marketing mix, to say, we're going to invest X number of dollars on paid search. We're going to know what it costs per click. We're going to know what it costs per lead, and we're going to know what our lifetime value is. Awesome. That only works though for last touch attribution, when they're actually using paid search as their last click. Equally important, I believe, is to give credit to all of the transactions that came through that were influenced by this investment as well. So for example, email is influencing some of these transactions. Paid search is influencing many of these transactions. Super important to think about the holistic approach, as well as just the immediate gratification. Sometimes it's so easy to get caught up looking at like the overview in Google Analytics, where we can just say, all right, Google AdWords was 60% of our traffic, but it was only 37% of our leads. There's a deeper story here. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're marketing an extended consideration product, like, my favorite example is Mikado, which is one of our Safari clients. We might buy an ad a year and a half ago, and they might go on Safari, tomorrow, right? But it was still pay per click that initially brought them to us. So it's just important to have like a holistic viewpoint on exactly not what is happening day to day in terms of your marketing return, but sync that as well in some more like long-term perspective. But I've been talking for like 30 minutes right now, so I'll hush up real quick and just see if we have any questions. How are we doing? Julie, did I just bore everyone to sleep there?
I don't think so, but no questions have been asked yet. So if anybody has
Cool.
a question, use the thing on the side and send them our way.
Cool. Awesome. So in terms of like being an outdoor company, how often do we look at these sort of statistics? The answer is usually every month. So I was saying that I was heading down tomorrow to one of our outdoor clients, and it's pretty easy to like jump into some data and see what's working and what isn't working, right? It's pretty easy. For example, hey, since January, we're up 48% on cost per click revenue. It's pretty easy to like jump through some of these and see some like immediate gratification across the board. Like I was saying, when it comes to like a highly considered purchase, and this is normally when you want to start parsing different tactics to look at what is pushing users through the sales funnel as effectively as possible. So like here, for example, I've added a alert conversation filter. So this is showing me all users to the site versus just users who have chatted, who have like had a conversation with us. And you can see how small little tweaks can have some pretty drastic reactions. So for example, if we look at first timers guides, which is like our brochure request, we can see that on average, all of our users, it takes about 0.38% of users to actually request a brochure. But if we go ahead and live chat with a user, it increases to 1.86%. Live chat is hands down the single greatest tool for a multi-day tour operator to increase conversion rate. Hands down the single greatest tool, or potentially the single greatest mistake. I have a tour operator who's a European bike tour company, and amazing company, and they had installed live chat, but they don't really take it as seriously. And about like 2-3 nights ago, I was going through I was going through their live chat logs, and I saw that there were literally about 100 people who had tried to book, and it wasn't showing up on their radar. If you're going to do it, it's hands down one of the best sources of leads. In fact, I can just show you really quick here on my own data. I'm just referencing, that summer camp again. Back in the day, brochure requests and online requests were like pretty significant. And then we started using live chat. And so actually like a couple interesting little points here. So I'll highlight just a few things to pay attention to. So you'll see that in terms of like to traditional lead requests, they increased and they peaked around 213, and then they started declining, and they started declining the same year more or less the same year that we started live chatting. And essentially what happened there is that when you're live chatting actively with customers, when you're actively outreaching to customers, there isn't a need for them to fill out a contact form or request a brochure form, because you're collecting that data over the phone. You're getting that either in a follow-up phone call or in the live chat. You're actually picking up that data. Interestingly, and you probably saw this in 2019, we had a huge spike in the number of brochure requests or online requests in 2018, and this is when we redesigned our website. A large reason for that jump, and I think a slight decline in the number of live chats as well, is because we dramatically transformed our calls to action. And it's kind of like silly. Like in the past, we had said things like request information, which is like a pretty boring way to have a call to action. And instead of just having request information, we added first timers guide and virtual reality kit and meet a director and contact us. We basically just added throughout the website so many different cool, unique, sticky opportunities for people to become a lead. And that's a large reason why, our lead volume just shot up. At the same point in time, we can't ignore the fact that live chat is one of the best converters of marketing traffic. It's incredible. I've been thinking a lot about like what the new thing is and what the new technology is. And I'm such a believer in live chat that during peak season or peak booking season, I will literally put someone on live chat for like 14 hours a day. That's how valuable I think it is. And you can just see from looking at the analytics that I was just showing you, for example, if you're spending money on advertising and you're not doing live chat, we're really hurting ourselves. Not to mention just the change in behavior that users experience when they've been chatted to and when they've not been chatted to. It is literally night and day. 2 pages in 3 minutes versus 5 pages in 15 minutes. I mean, that is the difference between a proactive live chat campaign and just total aggregate users. So I'm a huge believer, but I've always been like thinking about like what that next new thing is, what that next conversion type is, because now I'd say live chat is becoming ubiquitous. I don't think it's ubiquitous in that it's being used well. I think a lot of people install live chat and forget about it, and that is a woeful thing to do, because it can really hurt your business if you have live chat up and you're not there to serve people. I think it can reflect poorly. I guess in terms of what's next, I'm pretty convinced that text to chat is going to be a godsend. So on mobile, on a few websites now, and I'm literally researching this right now because I think it's going to be huge. There is like a text call to action on mobile that when you click it, it essentially adds a contact card to your phone and initiates a text message to you as the operator. And I've been thinking about like how to use that. Live chat is great, but in some cases you can answer all their questions and then they'll just go away, or in some cases, they'll reach out and then they'll go away. But the idea of making, I think any live chat using a website on a mobile phone is probably like a little, is not the ideal user experience or user flow. Because if you think about it, like you're on your phone, you're looking at a website, you start to chat, it takes up the entire screen. And if you get distracted or you go to a different page on your phone, you will no longer be notified if that chat operator writes back. So the idea that like live chat on a mobile device will move to texting for businesses is pretty amazing. And you actually probably see this with Google. Google now has a service when you're actually like looking at a business listing. I'll show you an example. So like if you're actually looking at a business listing like Cam Cody, there are scenarios where you can actually now, there's a new button that shows like text, whereby you can actually text a business. It's the same sort of thing. What basically Google and other vendors are realizing is that the idea of live chat or the idea of getting on the phone, it's just a little inconvenient at times. And so my next big like rollout in terms of like that second KPI, the rate at which we convert traffic to leads, I think text is going to be huge, and especially on mobile phone. I think I'm going to always be stuck live chatting with people who are on desktops and tablets. And I would love it if one of my live chat like companies actually provided a text option, because I think it would be amazing. But I'm guessing we'll probably be rolling that out with half dozen clients and testing it at the end of Q2, which will be kind of cool. Anyway, getting back to kind of like measuring ROI, there are a few other ways to make this easier when we're thinking about how the different types of marketing contribute to our sales. You probably saw here under conversions, I'm under multi-channel funnels. Now, I guess I'll just give a quick little overview as to like how all this stuff works. So I was saying earlier that if you don't have goals set up, if you don't have your booking software connected to Google Analytics, then it is extremely, extremely, extremely hard for you to actually properly evaluate any of your marketing spend, right? For obvious reasons. If you go to goals, of course, and you see nothing here, there's an issue. All this can be like super easily set up. You just go to your goals section and you just build each of these goals within Google Analytics, and then just connect it back to your booking software, connect it back to your website. In some cases like Olark, which is a live chatting software, and the one I've been referencing, it sets it up for you automatically. So all you have to do is click a button and then you're all set. Just depends. So in terms of like goals here, we have an overview. What's also interesting to look at is like funnel visualizations. Essentially, it like shows how people move through your site to get to the different goals. There are probably like a half a dozen different visualizations here that I think in some way, shape, or form have value. So this is like, I mean, it looks like a little simple, but it's crazy. So here we are, and we're looking at the source of all of my first timers leads, right? So I can see Google contributed the vast majority of them, followed by Facebook, followed by direct. We have Instagram and a few others in here as well. You can break this down by first touch attribution. You can break this down based on last touch attribution. You can break this down by a variety of different behaviors. For example, I have a client in the adventure space in California that spent about $100,000. And the idea this business owner had was that he was going to hire like a bunch of YouTube influencers to promote his product in Southern California. And he's on vacation right now, and he sent me a message being like, so how how is this very expensive campaign of mine doing? So what I did is I looked at the referral traffic that came through these different influencers, and I went to the acquisition tab and I looked at exactly what had yielded in terms of leads or in terms of bookings, and I realized that there's probably been less than $200 worth of value since that campaign began. The beauty, if you're a marketing professional or you're a business professional, the beauty here is that if you go under your conversions section of your website here, there's nowhere to hide, right? Usually at the end of every year, we just go through with all of our clients all the different ways in which they've advertised, and it's just an Excel spreadsheet, right? So like, Google AdWords, this is how much we spent. This is how much direct revenue found us as a result. Hey, we did this ad placement in the local newspaper. This is how many users came to our site. This is how many of them booked. This is how many of them became leads, whatever it is. I'm a huge advocate of you guys using this as your one source of truth, if nothing else, because there's no way to pervert it. Assuming that you have all of this stuff set up properly, you are totally fine to evaluate all of your different marketing strategies without the fluff. For example, like if you're running a lot of different email campaigns and you look at the end of the day about how all of your customers found you or engaged with you, and you don't see email properly represented in the conversion funnel, you have yourself an issue. And you can see here a lot of my business is like returning. So, the user who comes to the site 59 times and then books, those are users in which we obviously have a relationship with them in advance. And so yeah, it really is a pretty interesting way to evaluate what actually is happening with your user base. So you can figure out where your money is going. One of the things you probably don't see here a lot is social. So Facebook and Instagram in general have slightly different reporting mechanisms. It's not a bad thing, but it requires extra love to actually connect this properly with your analytics platform. Cool. I'm going to pause there and shift gears just a little bit. I'm a big numbers guy, and I pulled a couple monthly recaps from a few of my clients. This is a school client. Just to show you a couple different ways that you can like format this information and think about it month to month. You clearly have like my crazy breakdown here that I was showing you earlier. This is how I track all of my inquiries month to month, year to year, aligning to exactly what I'm spending and when. I have all of my booking data going back to when I first bought the company, all saved so I can figure out return rate and lifetime value and everything like that. Sometimes this is actually a formula that I built that I'm happy to share. This is actually for the same educational client, where we look at traffic to leads, to tours, to serious leads, to applicants, to look at our conversion rate, to applied students, to look at our conversion rate, to enrolled students, to look at our conversion rate. Having one source of truth analytically, I find, is exceptionally valuable. So like, I don't care how you guys cut the data. I don't, and if you want to like super nerd out with me at AO, I would love nothing more than to sit down and like cut through all your Excel files and play around and build all these frameworks. Like it's pretty sad to say, but this is where I genuinely get a lot of enjoyment. The point being is that none of this stuff can come day to day, month to month. You guys have to decide what metrics are your source of truth, what metrics truly positively influence your business, and then stick with them and scale them. So I see massive fluctuations for customers month to month. I hope none of you guys have a Cuba business right now, because if you did, you'd be in a little bit of an issue. Like, we live in a world with massive fluctuations, forest fires and floods, things change month to month. But if you have 3 or 4 years of marketing data aligned with spend data, aligned with revenue in one document, you can cut out a lot of the week to week, month to month noise and focus on the big picture. Or at least that's what I find helpful. There's just so much to distract us. It's sometimes nice just to open the doc. I myself do it once a month. So if you're the type of business owner or marketing manager that's looking at this stuff like every few days, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it can be hard to like look holistically when there's such a small data set required. If you're spending 30, 40, 50 grand a month, well, then maybe you look every week. But if you're spending, 2, 3, 4,000 bucks, check in once a month and just make sure that the top line data is being supported. I was going to hope to keep a few minutes at the end for questions, but I just wanted to kind of think about, and I referenced this in the last session, but I just want to get back to it. The idea of a customer journey, I think, is really important when thinking about these sort of like business metrics and sales funnels. We have to decide exactly how users, what's that?
Peter, you have, can you show the full screen of your, of that? Somebody's asking to see the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I can also share all this stuff after the fact if you'd like.
Okay.
And by all thing, do you mean the customer journey? Do you mean the budgets, the framework? Okay. So in
Yeah, that's better.
terms of, all right, cool, sweet. So this is what I was just referencing earlier. I'm happy to like share all these frameworks with you guys. You know, I'm big into sharing, so the more the merrier. I just found it helpful for myself that when building my framework, I looked at my customer journey and I basically did, and you guys probably do this. I looked at every archetype type of client, every B2B client, every group leader, every individual customer. You know, is it young adults? Are they families? I basically looked at all the different customer journeys we have for our business. I align that with our content, I align that with our site. And then of course I made provisions within that for all of our like monthly reporting so we could look at it with clarity. Um, you know, truly happy to share all these different frameworks if you'd like. And also that wasn't just a throwaway offer. If you guys like have this sort of stuff that you've been working on internally and you just want an extra set of eyes on it, happy to you know, if you're coming to AO, happy to hang out. Like one of the best parts of AO is just having a lot of amazing minds in one place, you know, and being able to, you know, share ideas and thoughts in a safe manner. When I think about budgeting, and I'm sure you guys do all the same thing, when I look at my budgets for the year, I look at, you know, this is what I use. This is like my go-to. So I start when I go through like my budgeting here, and let's just see if I can actually find my marketing. So like literally when I go through and I start doing my marketing, I literally use that last framework as my go-to. It's what starts my conversation. It's candidly this document. So we work backwards from where we want to be financially, and then we look at what we need to do to make that happen, what conversion rates we need to maintain, what cost per clicks we need to maintain. And I had a situation probably in the last 2, 3 months where I unexpectedly saw a massive change in my market, particularly in the New York market. And it required me to spend an extra 50 grand and really move some pieces around in order to like address the issue. But thankfully, I was in it. Actually, no, I can just probably just show you. At one point here on February, so February 19th, I was 191 sales ahead of last year. So call it, you know, roughly, you know, I don't know. We were doing really well compared to last year, and you can just see here that our gain over last year dropped to one point in May that we were behind by 20. And we made some drastic changes in April, and we brought ourselves back to where we're now, you know, 20 ahead, and we'll probably end up the year right now about 50 ahead. Having all of this data allowed us to figure out what was working and what wasn't working. And it wasn't like AdWords wasn't working. It wasn't like Facebook wasn't working. We had one of our B2B relationships, which usually contributes about 800,000 in revenue. That was contributing about $100,000 in revenue. And while everything else was doing really well, that relationship fell apart. And so we wound up in a situation where we had doubled down on Facebook, doubled down on Instagram, doubled down on apps. And thankfully, we will have bridged it. But it's one of like the, you know, you don't want to rely too much on, you know, consumer marketing. But, you know, this year for us was a great education in how dangerous, you know, partnerships can be and B2B relationships can be. Because if you're relying on one particular group or individual for a large piece of your business and that vanishes, well, then hopefully you're in a situation where we were in that you could instantly reassign resources and still stay where you need to be budget-wise.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everybody for hanging with us, and we will send some follow-up information to y'all. Thank you and have a great day.
Bye, guys.
Bye.